Do we need to travel to distant lands in the east to attack the enemies of God, when there are Jews right before our eyes, a race that is the greatest enemy of God? We've got it all backwards.
Whoa! Whoa! What is this? Mr. Mustache Man? Video is super late, but People's Crusade, First Crusade,
In our previous episode, we examined the elements and people who directly led to a unique call to arms aimed at aiding the Eastern Roman Empire on the way to reclaiming Jerusalem. This was a carefully planned endeavor.
Now, when I was reacting to the First Crusade by Epic Issue TV a long time ago, they talked about this, but they didn't really go into this in detail. So I am
coordinated with the Emperor Alexios Komnenos, aimed at directing the martial prowess of the Frankish nobility.
And not just that, but again, like I said, I'm actually going to be doing all the series that I'm behind on. All throughout this week, right? So yeah, I hope you look
towards a common enemy.
Do that.
But as Urban II sent out his bishops to spread his fiery speech, another man would pick up the mantle and irreversibly change the Christians' relations with a different religion. You won't be inspiring a crusade anytime soon if you can't
sponsor Grammarly.
While Urban was still touring central and southern France, a man by the name of Peter the Hermit, inspired by the Pope, decided to launch his own campaign, carrying his own message and delivering it to a different target audience. Starting out in Berry, Peter began touring the urban centers of northern France, and before long, he captivated the hearts and minds of thousands of people. One of his supporters described him by writing, "Outdoors he wore a woolen tunic which revealed his ankles, and above it a hood. He wore a cloak to cover his upper body and a bit of his arms, but his feet were bare. He drank wine and ate fish, but scarcely ever ate bread." Another eyewitness reports, "We saw him wander through cities and towns, spreading his teaching, surrounded by so many people, given so many gifts, and acclaimed for such great piety that I don't ever remember anyone equally honored. Whatever he did or said seemed like something almost divine. Even the hairs of his mule were torn out as though they were relics." Peter was an extremely charismatic preacher.
So, bro put all his stats into charisma, okay.
Who told the story of how he visited Jerusalem a few years earlier and saw firsthand how the Muslims were mistreating the Christians and desecrating the holy sites. According to him, as he slept in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, he received a vision of Christ, who handed him a round letter that instructed all Christendom from all parts of the world to take up arms and journey to Jerusalem to fight against the pagans and to claim eternal possession of the city with all its pertinent lands. There is no evidence that Peter ever made such a journey, but that didn't stop thousands from joining him as he traveled from one city to the next, warning that the last days were at hand and that the Christians would have to travel to Jerusalem to battle the Antichrist. Compared to Urban's more moderate approach targeting the warrior class, Peter appealed to a larger group of people, mostly commoners, at a particularly sensitive moment in time. 1095 saw the occurrence of a meteor shower, an aurora borealis, a lunar eclipse, the passage of a comet, blood-colored clouds, and a number of fascinating stories.
So was that a coincidence though? Like was that all just a simple coincidence? Like I could genuinely like see why people would think that's a sign from freaking God, man. Like, bro, how hard is it for something like that all to happen like around like the same time? That's kind of mad.
Some said that the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne had come back from the dead, ready to lead his people into Jerusalem. When word of the Crusade began to spread, people began disfiguring and tattooing themselves, claiming miracles and divine signs. But arguably,
bro, it's crazy to me how people back then had this type of mindset, bro. Like, although I actually say this in a few of my videos, is like, you'd think that this is all in the past, right? That people unironically don't think like this. No, man. Come to certain parts of the Caribbean, I'm telling you, like, I have grown up with people who think like this. Like, I've lived around this. So when I'm hearing this just sounds normal to me. This is just like, oh, well, that's what they thought. Oh, well, I have no idea how many times I have heard people unironically seeing stuff like this and thinking, oh my gosh, it's a sign from God, or literally visions, bro. It's wild. I'm telling you, this is so second nature to me that that's why I'm not really like giving like a reaction of oh they're crazy or anything. I'm just like, oh well, that's just what they thought, because I'm so used to that by now, man.
Probably the largest contributor to the widespread frenzy was the ongoing series of plagues. If we take a look at...
You wanna know what's funny? That's a product of colonialism, hilariously enough. You know what I find funny, right? Is that I will see like so many Caribbean people, right? So many people from the English Caribbean, they'll like complain about colonialism, and then they'll proceed to go and be like the most like Christian religious person like ever. Like hello, the reason why Christianity came to the Caribbean was because of colonialism. Like, come on now, like. It's double standards is absolutely ridiculous.
At the multiple and independent writers during this period, a trend starts to show. During the period between 1092 and 1095, there are over 40 mentions of plague, peaking in 1094 with 25 reported plagues, often accompanied by famine. Surrounded by Catholic imagery of damnation in the form of frescoes and grotesque sculptures, the notion of abandoning the little they had to journey to the land of milk and honey, that is how many Christians thought of the Holy Land, suddenly seemed like a great idea. Contrary to popular belief, the so-called People's Crusade had a large portion of nobles who joined Peter's group, and those nobles would be the ones who were in charge of the crusade and were about to unleash chaos on Germany. Still, it is important to mention that although there were some members of this movement who embarked on the journey for materialistic reasons, this was very much the exception rather than the norm. After passing through Champagne in March 1096, Peter moved into Lorraine before spending Easter in Cologne. He sent smaller parties to preach in the surrounding cities, while assembling a force of 15,000 men, women and children. Peter was joined by many minor nobles, among them Walter Sans-Souvois, Renaud of Bray, Geoffrey of Burel, and many others. The plan was to take the route towards Jerusalem, one which the local German populace was very aware of since the Great German Pilgrimage of 1064. This pilgrimage was led by a number of...
What was that? I've never... Great German Pilgrimage? What?
Major German clerics, among them Archbishop Siegfried of Mainz, and although possibly thousands of pilgrims were killed by local Bedouins in Caesarea, most of them reached Jerusalem and returned home by sea. However, this...
Christians went on pilgrimage. I never knew Christians went on their own pilgrimage. I thought that was like an Islamic thing, I can't even lie.
This was another big deviation from Urban's route and timing, which intended...
This is like the first detailed map of Europe from this time period. Like actual detailed map of Europe that I have seen. This makes me understand like what is going on so much better, because I see so much of these videos, right? And they don't put a freaking like full detailed map of Europe, and even then this map is low-key incomplete because he's not showing Eastern Europe, like far Eastern Europe. He's just showing Kiev and Rus. But for the most part, and Iberia also isn't really like show. But for the most part, it's quite detailed. I actually get a full picture of what's going on.
For the Crusade to cross the Adriatic and land in Dyrrhachium on August 15th, 1096, coinciding with the Byzantine harvest. a date Alexios Komnenos knew ahead of time and prepared for by sending vast amounts of grain merchants and Latin translators to the region. Peter took the time to preach in Cologne to recruit more German lords, but Walter was impatient and decided to leave as soon as the feast was over with a few thousand companions. As a result of this schism, the Crusade was now divided into 5 groups, one under Peter, one commanded by Walter, and 3 more under the leadership of nobles, who distorted the words of the initial call even further and weaponized them against the thriving Jewish community. The series of events which we now call
what?
Rhineland massacres would become a turning point in history. This was not the first time when a minority was attacked by the majority, but
so when I hear minority, I think of black people, right? Well, specifically African Americans, because in my country, black people are actually the vast majority. Even though we're English, womp womp, I can hear all the ultra nationalist people crying. You know what's funny to me when I think about that is those ultra nationalists, right? All those like super duper ultra nationalist English people who are like so patriotic for England, blah blah blah. It's like they'll look at us, right, and they'll be like, "Oh, you're not English because you're black." I'm like, wait, how are you an ultra nationalist English person that's super patriotic, but you don't know the history of Barbados and the relationship that it has between England and the fact that it's the most British Caribbean island due to its history? And it's like, if you truly were like an ultra nationalist person who's super patriotic, like you would be able to like know that Barbados is very much English too, because like it was an uninhabited island that the English settled, and you know they bought slaves from Africa, and those slaves assimilated when slavery was abolished, because most British people didn't like slavery, right? Like to me, that's like that's how that's assimilation to the core. You can't get any other ways of assimilation other than that. There was no conquering, none of that. But it's just funny because I hear minorities, I need to just think of like black people, right? But specifically African Americans, because but it seems like Europe, up in Europe, even before they had contact with a lot of black people, they just love to persecute minorities.
But the scale and nature of these attacks would mark a new chapter and set a precedent which would recur numerous times in the centuries to come. Contemporary scholars writing after the conquest of Jerusalem tried their best to put the blame on Peter or peasant greed, with the goal of distancing the more successful Prince's Crusade from the failed People's Crusade. But not because of the mass slaughter of the Jews, which the Church unilaterally saw as a grave sin, but because after many of them were forcibly baptized, they reconverted once the storm had passed. But how did this all start, and why did these 3 groups begin the rampage in the first place? Even before the army crossed the Rhine, word spread proclaiming, "Do we need to travel to distant lands in the east to attack the enemies of God, when there are Jews right before our eyes, a race that is the greatest enemy of God? We've got it all backwards."
Whoa! Whoa! What is this? Mr. Mustache Man? I think we found the inspiration of Mr. Mustache Man. Holy shit. I hope that doesn't demonetize my video, because we all know that YouTube is ran by, those group of people. I hope that doesn't demonetize my video, dude.
Days went by as children asked their parents.
That is a wild statement. And it's even more wild because they believe in the same God. Like, what? They believe in the same God.
This was Jerusalem at the site of each new city, and the growing excitement turned into impatience. Most of the German nobles were busy fighting amongst each other, but some of them quickly became obsessed with the promise of indulgence in return for military service. Count Emicho of Leiningen added his own ideas to the crusade by tattooing a cross on himself and proclaiming that he was the last emperor, the one who would unite East and West before going to Jerusalem and wiping out Judaism. He is well equipped and well.
Holy, bro. But like, didn't Christianity literally come from Judaism? What's with the hate of Judaism? Christianity literally came from Judaism. What? I'm so confused. This seems so hypocritical and ironic. Like, what?
Organized army unleashed a wave of violence, which began on May 3rd, 1096, at the newly settled city of Speyer by storming into the synagogue. The Bishop of Speyer, who had heard of the coming danger, did everything he could to protect the Jewish populace, and as a result of his actions, only 11 of them were killed. 15 days later, Emicho descended upon the city of Worms, where according to the Mainz Chronicle, they took a trampled corpse of theirs, which had been buried 30 days previously, and carried it through the city, saying, "Behold what the Jews have done to our comrade. They took a Gentile and boiled him in water. Then they poured the water into our wells in order to kill us." Many Jews, forewarned by the events in Speyer, had already sought the protection of the Bishop of Worms. They looked on from the sanctuary of his palace as those of their brethren that had chosen to remain at home were massacred. The Crusaders demanded that they convert, and those who did were spared, but the majority of them refused. Emicho laid siege to the bishop's palace, and once his soldiers broke in, they discovered that the Jews inside had decided to take their own lives rather than fall to their hands. Only 5 days.
That's actually heartbreaking. I like this actually happened. Like, what? This is just pure. This is disgusting. How could you do this, bro? Like, Judaism and Christianity, yes, they're different, but they're still like brothers, dude. Like how could you do that to your own fellow brethren religion? And Judaism, Christianity doesn't even like have like stark, like insane, like differentiating beliefs like Islam does, for you to have such a radical mindset. Wow. Absolutely heartbreaking. I don't know what else to say.
Days later, the band was already in Mainz, where once again the local archbishop took a massive amount of money in return for sheltering his Jewish citizens. At first, the rest of the populace rallied around the Jews, but after a 2-day siege, some of them opened the gates, which the Crusaders saw as a miracle. "Behold, the gates have opened by themselves. All this the crucified has done for us, so that we might avenge his blood on the Jews." 1014.
Oh, wait. This makes sense. Because the Jews turned on Jesus. Oh, okay. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Of them died in a single day. Hearing of this, the citizens of Cologne took action.
Why the hell didn't I not realize that?
And massacred their own Jewish population, destroying every Torah scroll they found along the way, while other cities like Regensburg were spared after mass forced conversions. The second group, under a monk named Volkmar, decided to pass through Bavaria and travel to Prague, inspiring another Jewish pogrom on June the 1st, while the Duke was away. Another group, with at least 15,000 followers, led by a man named Gottschalk, also committed atrocities as they made their way along the Danube. It is important to note that the majority of these leaders would later join the Prince's Crusade, whose leaders also attacked members of the Jewish community.
It's hard to put in.
Meanwhile, Walter and around 10,000 Crusaders made it to the Hungarian border in May and met with King Koloman, who treated him well. but by the time they reached the Sava River, an accident occurred, involving 16 of Walter's men bartering with local weapons merchants before they were attacked and stripped of their clothes and valuables. The humiliated soldiers walked naked to the army camp, only to find that the governor of Belgrade refused to open his markets.
Bro. How in the world? I'm way too tired. I'm way too tired to process
Walter
that.
plundered the countryside and rounded up as much cattle as he could in between skirmishes with the Hungarian and Byzantine border guards. At one point, 140 crusaders were routed and sought refuge in a chapel, which the Byzantines burned down. Eventually, the group made it to Niš, where they were granted weapons and supplies by the governor, who ensured their safe passage to Constantinople, promising open markets along the way. Peter the Hermit's contingent, which had as many as 40,000 followers, was only a few days behind Walter's. Upon their entry to Hungary, King Koloman made them swear to keep the peace, but as the Crusaders approached the Sava River, they spotted the clothes of 16 Crusaders hanging from the battlements of Zemun. This sight came at the same time as a rumor began to circulate that a local Hungarian warlord and the governor of Belgrade were plotting against them. After camping in front of the city for 17 days, Peter ordered an attack, instructing his archers to target the watchmen, while the infantry assaulted the walls with scaling ladders. According to one source, 4,000 Hungarians were killed at the cost of just 100 Crusaders, and whether the numbers were exaggerated or not, the city was taken and became their base for a week. By this time, Peter learned that the Hungarians were gathering an army, so he ordered his men to begin crossing the river, with 150 ships and rafts made from timber stripped from the houses and bound with rope.
It's insane to me how this time period is a literal RPG, bro. You think something like this could happen today? I always think about this every single day whenever I watch these types of videos, man. I'm always thinking to myself, like, I'm like, yo, like back then was truly like an open world RPG where you could literally kind of sort of, well, and it depends on how you look at it. You can literally sort of get up and just do something like drastic like this, and it'll be unironically like a canon event in history. I'm like, you can't really do that today. Today it's just like you get up, you go to work or you go to school, and you go home and you enjoy the few hours left of your day and repeat. Like, it's just that, you know, like.
While the people and supplies were being ferried,
but this, man, it's just like these people were got up, you know, some of these people, you literally could just conquer other people if you had the means to, and boom, congratulations, you're an official empire, you're an official kingdom. You can't even do that. You know how hard it is to get a country now today? But back then, people were just going around just conquering other people left, right, and center, just if they had the means to, you know what I mean? Now today is like, oh, we're a civilized society, blah blah blah. It's like today doesn't feel open world anymore, and it just feels surreal that unironically like these events happening like unironically happen, man. Freaking hell, like.
Filled with Pecheneg archers approached and opened fire. A makeshift Frankish navy grouped up and attempted to counterattack, destroying all the enemy vessels, but their cohesion was significantly damaged. As they arrived at Niš, a deal was struck, exchanging high-ranking hostages in return for access to the local markets. But it didn't take long for hostilities to resume. A group of soldiers were dissatisfied with another group of merchants and decided to set fire to several mills and houses just outside the city, as the Crusaders were already on the road. In response, the governor launched a raid on the rear, mostly made up of the elderly men, women, and children. Cattle were stolen. Dozens were killed or captured before the rest of the column could even react. Peter could not let this go unpunished, so he turned his army around and attempted to negotiate. His followers, however, were uninterested in peace, and 2,000 young men attacked the city without any semblance of a plan. The garrison managed to hold out against the attack, repelling them with arrows and other projectile weapons, and once the Crusaders retreated, the troops sallied out. The disjointed and broken army was now in full flight, and many drowned in the river. Men, women and children fell prey to the Byzantines, who managed to capture most of their goods, including a wagon filled with gold and silver. The Crusaders scattered into the nearby forests, but miraculously, only a quarter of them were lost in the battle. However, that included a good portion of the fighting men, as well as most of their provisions. On July 12th, Peter reached Serdica and met with imperial emissaries, who ensured that there was no trouble for the remainder of the journey, and that the army was well supplied. A generous gesture which showed both the commitment and preparation of Alexios Komnenos. The next group to reach Hungary was that of Folkmar, but after a brawl broke out in the capital, the army quickly responded by killing and enslaving anyone who failed to escape. Then came Gottschalk's contingent, and this time the Hungarian king kept them at Moson for a prolonged period of time, and a Hungarian merchant was impaled after a failed bargain. Battle lines were
Oh my gosh. Oh my freaking... Somebody called Vlad the Impaler. And the fact that this happened like relatively close to freaking Romania too, around the Romania Transylvania. Oh my gosh, dude.
Drawn.
Oh, but that's
neither
horrific.
side wanted to engage, so after a prolonged stare down, the Hungarians proposed a truce. If indeed you surrender them to the king with all the money you have, you might soothe his anger and find grace in his eyes. But if you do otherwise, not one of you will stand before his face or go on living, since you have committed such contumacy and calumny in his kingdom. The Crusaders agreed, and as soon as they were disarmed, the Hungarians put them to the sword. Finally, Emmiko's army crossed into Hungary, but Koloman refused to even deal with them, so the Crusaders decided to lay siege to the capital and devastated the countryside. There were numerous skirmishes.
These so-called Christians are affecting other Christians more than they're affecting the actual Muslims, hilariously enough.
While bridges and catapults were built, and finally 2 breaches were opened on August 15th, 1096. While the king was preparing to flee, the defenders organized a desperate last stand as the Franks poured in. The tides turned, and the knights were routed. Those who were well equipped and mounted managed to escape, while the rest were vanquished.
I'm Abby Mac.
Back in Constantinople, Peter finally met up with Walter's contingent and personally met with Alexios, who was instantly impressed by the charismatic hermit. The number of crusaders was
even
significant.
Alexios, bro. Oh my gosh, even Alexios got rizzed up, bro. Damn, bro. Bro really did put his stats on all just freaking charisma. Nah. Freaking Mountain Blade Banner Lore 2 reference. It's kind of funny how that game is dying.
But there were little more than 500 knights and a few thousand footmen, as most of the fighters were lost along the way fighting Hungarians and Byzantines. So the emperor advised that they wait for reinforcements outside the city walls. This was seen as a grave insult to the thousands of people who had travelled all this way and were now prevented from seeing some of the most holy sites in Christendom. So naturally, more looting occurred. According to Anna Komnena's Alexiad, the Christians behaved abominably. They sacked and burned palaces of the city and stole the lead from church roofs so that they could sell it back to the Greeks. Despite his lack of confidence, Alexios knew that his guests couldn't stay long, so they were ferried across to Anatolia on the 6th of August.
He just ferries them. Like it's crazy to me how he just was so okay with it. Like, I mean, obviously not, because he quickly ferried them across to Anatolia, but oh my goodness.
Once on the Asiatic shore,
Alessio's
they
cooked
began
though.
attacking
Apparently he's like super good Roman emperor. So
all directions, usually Christians living under the Seljuks, pillaging houses and churches all the way to Nicomedia, which was deserted since its sack 15 years earlier and was converted to their new base of operations. The Romans kept a steady supply of grain ships, selling provisions at a fair price to it, and the other base at Civetot. But months went by without much progress, and the coins were starting to run out. On October the 1st, Peter decided to go back to Constantinople in hopes of striking a new deal with Alexios, and in his absence, a rift formed between the Frankish knights on one side and the German and Italian knights on the other. As animosity grew, the latter group decided to leave Civetot and raid as far as Nicaea on their own. The once great Roman city was now the capital of the Sultanate of Rum, ruled by Kilij Arslan. The Nicaean garrison charged out, but was defeated by the knights, who despite their lack of leadership, had some of the best training and equipment money could buy.
Yeah. It's that heavy armor, bro. Also, some of these are Frankish knights, dude. Frankish knights, ooh, beasts, absolute beasts, man. I can't even lie. Like France, man. Just for a while, France was just like France's stuff was just absolute juggernaut.
After the Turks were repelled, they headed towards the nearby castle of Zerigordos, which they quickly captured, sparing only its Christian population. The castle had plenty of grain, meat and wine, but was a signal to the Turks that this was not a threat they could deal with easily. 3 days later, Kilij Arslan made his way towards it, defeating an ambush laid by the Italian contingent along the way.
And there it goes.
Siege lines were drawn, and the unyielding Christians were cut off from the rest of their allies. The only two sources of fresh water nearby were located outside the castle walls and guarded by the Seljuks. As the days dragged on, the Crusaders began to drink their own urine and sewage water. Some of them buried themselves.
Yeah, I almost said the N-word. That's so disgusting, dude.
In the sand in the hope of retaining moisture, or tried to suck water out of the dry earth.
What?
On the 8th day, the gate was set on fire, causing a wild panic. Some surrendered, while others jumped, sallied out, and were assaulted with arrows. Only a few Germans managed to survive. Back in the camp, Peter was still negotiating, while a Turkish spy told the Crusaders that Nicaea had fallen and that the Crusaders were dividing up the loot between themselves. Once again, the Christians were divided, with some advising to wait for their leader, while the rest wanted to act now. A decision was made that all the fighting men would deploy in 6 divisions and move towards Nicaea, while the women, children and sick stayed in Civetot. Somewhere along the way, the truth was revealed, and excitement turned into panic, which only multiplied as Kilij Arslan's army ambushed them from the woods, just 3 miles away from the camp. No formations were drawn. Instead, each of the divisions rallied themselves and attacked the far more mobile enemy. The horse archers employed hit-and-run tactics before encircling 2 of the divisions, while another group of Turkish cavalry circled around to cut off their retreat. The remaining 4 divisions charged forward as the Seljuks fired at them in a classic feigned retreat. Initially, the situation looked hopeful, as the mounted knights took down hundreds of their opponents, but then the Turks aimed at their horses, which led to a massacre. There were only a few survivors, which did not include Walter Sans-Avoir.
Come on, this like reminds me of, I was literally watching a video the other day where it was like, can't you simply turn off a lightsaber and just turn it back on in the middle of a duel just to like finish somebody off? I'm like, oh, come on, that's so cheap, man. Like, I know it's not like life isn't fair, but come on, at least be fair.
Who had 7 arrows sticking out of him. The remainder was chased down to Civetot. The camp followers lit bonfires, which were carried by the winds into the enemy, but the situation was hopeless. Tens of thousands who were inspired by Peter now ran for their lives. Many of them drowned or were killed, but most were captured. Those who refused to convert were taken captive and carted to Antioch, Aleppo, and as far as Khorasan. 3,000 managed to reach a nearby ruined castle and hold off the attackers with improvised fortifications. The following day, a single boat managed to reach Constantinople, prompting Alexios to send his fleet and rescue a fragment of the people who initially set out from France.
Wow.
Anna Komnena's description of the dead no doubt exaggerated their numbers, but it nonetheless provides a good sense of how the slaughter must have looked to the next wave of crusaders arriving 9 months later. When they gathered the remains of the fallen lying on every side, they heaped up, I will not say a mighty ridge or hill or peak, but a mountain of considerable height and depth and width, so huge was the mass of bones. But this was not the end of the First Crusade, and in the next episode, we'll talk about the beginning of the Prince's Crusade. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without.
And if you made it all the way this far into the video, make sure you like and subscribe and go check out my other stuff on my channel. I got plenty of reactions on my channel at this point. You'll definitely like it if you made it all the way this far. If you have any suggestions, man, go and comment it down below. Alrighty, man. Thank you for watching and goodbye.